Okay, ladies and gentlemen, after that wonderful drum roll, it's time for the Charlton Heston Courage Under Fire Award. Charlton Heston was a great man. I was fortunate to be his vice president at National Rifle Association until I became president in my own right and learned tremendous things from the great Charlton Heston. He presented the first award to Chief Buthelezi. For those of you who may have forgotten about the great man Buthelezi, he was the founder of the Inkatha Freedom Party in South Africa, the legendary anti-communist in South Africa. Incidentally, he was just re-elected in 2014 after many, many, many glorious years of leadership in South Africa. After that, Rush Limbaugh, Phyllis Schlafly, Tom Coburn, the great senator from Oklahoma, and then one time we gave the award to America's veterans. And now, David Keene, tell us who's going to get it tonight.
My partner in crime, Kane Robinson. We're only going to take a minute of your time. We don't give this award every year. We give it when we think there's somebody out there who deserves recognition for what they've done in the past year to stand up for the values that we all share. And this year, we're presenting the Charlton Heston Courage Under Fire Award to Sheriff David Clark of Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. You've all seen Sheriff Clark on Fox, on television, here at CPAC. But this last year, he stood up in a way that one wouldn't have expected him to have to. In the Democratic primary, and Dave Clark is a proud Democrat, Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York City, and his friends spent $800,000 in a primary attempt to defeat him in their effort to cleanse the Democratic Party of believers in the Second Amendment. They took on the wrong man. And because they did, and because he prevailed, we're proud to present Sheriff David Clark with the Charlton Heston Courage Under Fire Award. And it helps that he's from Wisconsin.
Wow. Any of you out there that think that this is scripted, it's not, totally unexpected. I'm humbled. So I didn't come with a lot prepared to say. I don't deserve this. Well, thank you. I share this award. Some of you may know some of what went on over the last year, and I can't get this done without the support of people. People like the two gentlemen standing up here tonight, but not just that, the Washington Times, the NRA, people like Chris Cox, Wayne LaPierre. But more than anything, I want to thank you because I just want to be a foot soldier in this movement. That's all I ever asked for. I said, just give me a job. I don't mean a working job. Just give me something to do in this movement to help move it forward. You folks have been so gracious. The outpouring of support has been overwhelming to me. It really has. So I share this award with the American people. Now it's about the point in this thing that I start to stammer because, like I said, I don't know what to say. This is unbelievable. You folks are maligned. The conservative movement is maligned by forces on the left. You're called a lot of names. They claim that you don't like black folks, among other things. And I know better. I know you because I've met you. And I know you because of what's in your heart, and it's real. So again, thank you. I'm not doing enough for you. So again, anything that I can do to help this movement. I didn't wear my hat tonight. I guess I should have. But somebody asked me recently, they said, Sheriff, why do you wear a cowboy hat? And I said, because two of my heroes wore cowboy hats, Ronald Reagan and John Wayne. And I mean that. So again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless the United States of America.
Now to present the Defender of the Constitution Award, which is a Founding Fathers document donated by the National Rifle Association, is our truly able Executive Director, Dan Schneider.
The Constitution is an aspirational document. Our founders had the foresight to understand that everything that they wanted to achieve, they would not be able to achieve at its drafting. So the winner tonight is somebody who either defends the rights that are articulated in that and that we've enjoyed, or somebody who helps to achieve that more perfect union that our Constitution describes. One thing is clear under our Constitution. Nobody is above the law. And nobody knows this motto better than Tom Fenton, the indefatigable president of Judicial Watch. I've gotten to know Tom pretty well. He has led his organization to great heights. Without the sort of work that Judicial Watch does, our liberties and our freedoms would be in greater jeopardy than they are today. Judicial Watch ensures that the public officials in the executive branch and in the judiciary act ethically and do not abuse the powers entrusted to them. While Judicial Watch is not, it is entirely non-political, as was in evidence during the Bush administration when many people wondered, what is Judicial Watch doing? Its work has never been more important than now. What this administration is doing today to our constitutional rights is almost unforgivable. But Judicial Watch stands ready to identify those abuses and uncover those documents that help us fight to protect our rights. Just this week, Judicial Watch revealed that 2 top aides to Secretary Hillary Clinton, including her own chief of staff, knew from the outset that the Benghazi mission compound was under attack by armed militant assailants tied to a terrorist group, despite the repeated denials from this administration. Earlier in the year, Judicial Watch discovered documents that showed how the White House orchestrated a PR campaign to portray the Benghazi attack as rooted in a video. In April, Judicial Watch found the smoking gun showing that Lois Lerner directly communicated with the Department of Justice about criminal prosecution of tax-exempt entities, contrary to the assurances, repeated assurances, of the administration. And a few months later, Judicial Watch uncovered new IRS documents showing that the IRS targeted conservative organizations 15 times more often than liberal organizations. Their work put a lie to the IRS claim that they did not target conservatives. The greatest threat to our liberty and our Constitution is unaccountable and ever-expanding government. Under Tom Fenton's leadership, Judicial Watch has been unequaled in defending our ideas and the ideals of our founders. Tom, please come forward.
Thank you, Cleta. Thank you, Dan and Matt, and all of you at ACU. And I accept this on behalf of the staff at Judicial Watch. It's wonderful. I get to talk about everything we do. And we have staff from our organization here who I can't see, but if you could stand up, please. These are the folks who do all the hard work. My wife Kelly is here. My eldest daughter Grace is here. And this is why we do the work we do. It's on behalf of the Constitution, but it's also the aggrieved citizens and our children who are going to suffer the consequences of a Washington that's really out of control and off the rails. This award is really also should be directed to our clients, taxpayers, people who work in government who are being attacked because they're trying to do the right thing and obey the rule of law. And of course, our supporters. We have over 300,000 active supporters. There's a lesson in there for you politicians. Fighting corruption is a good issue. And if you really do something about it, people will follow you. You know, James Madison, I think I'm quoting James Madison correctly. Ironically, this was this generous gift courtesy of the NRA. James Madison said, you know, ignorance is a horrible thing. And to paraphrase, you have the problem of ignorance with matched with leads to tyranny in ways that we don't like and we wouldn't want. And the Founding Fathers understood that without access to information, as James Madison understood, that way you have ignorance. And if you're ignorant about the government, then you can't govern yourselves. Without accountability, there is no self-government. And if Congress comes into Washington and writes a check with its eyes closed, and we have a president who doesn't follow the law and agencies who aren't accountable, that isn't self-government. And we show that you can fight City Hall, and you can fight the Justice Department and beat them. You can fight the IRS and beat them. You can fight Hillary Clinton's State Department and beat them. There is a way forward for those of us concerned about the way Washington is operating. And that way is following the law. You know, George Washington said, one of the first things you see when you come in Judicial Watch's offices, George Washington said, the truth will prevail where there are great pains taken to bring it to light. The truth will prevail, and the law allows us access to information, allows us to challenge the government. And without that ability, we're no more. This IRS was used to keep us down. We can't be intimidated by our government. And I tell you, thank God for the fact that we're in this United States, because we can complain about our government, rightly so. But we meet with people from all over the world. And if they did what we do here at CPAC and what we do at Judicial Watch every day, those people would be in jail or worse. You may have seen the news today. The main opponent of President Putin was gunned down in the streets of Moscow. Thank God we're in America where we can criticize our government and not fear that type of punishment yet. So I encourage you, while I have this podium, tell your members of Congress, battling corruption is about the most important thing you can do. This president, if we use the IRS to keep himself in office, there's got to be accountability for that. Those 4 Americans killed in Benghazi, there has to be accountability for them. Not only for their families, but also for the military and the families of those currently serving and those deployed overseas. Their morale's been decimated because the pact has been broken. They can't trust their government to be there if they're overrun. There has to be accountability for a president and his people lying about a terrorist attack that led to the death of 4 Americans. There has to be accountability. And there has to be accountability for the immigration crisis. And I'll leave you with this idea. One solution for immigration is enforce the law. Because in Washington we think it's policy. But those of you on the front lines know if we don't have secure borders, if we don't have the rule of law, our safety is put at risk. So our founding fathers understood this. And I think if we incorporate that more into our thinking, that these are serious issues. In some ways, they're life and death issues. We'll be a lot better off as a country. And the sooner Washington understands that it's not just about politics, it's about our freedoms, the better off we'll all be. Thank you very much on behalf of all of us here at Judicial Watch. And thank you again to ACU.
Am I live? Congratulations again, Tom. You know, this was supposed to be a big surprise for Tom, and I'm sitting next to him with a script, and I'm seeing Tom Fitton, and so I hope it was a surprise. So, in 2006, Wayne LaPierre and Ambassador Jean Kirkpatrick were seated next to each other at a head table. And they started, and it was an event, I think it was honoring Jesse Helms. And they started to talk about the abysmal state of academia and the liberal bias and the politically correct professors. And so this is what happened as a result of that conversation. The ACU leadership at that time, David Keene as chair and Cleta Mitchell as the foundation chair, went to Michael Greevey, and thanks to Michael Greevey's vision, at the Lined and Harry Bradley Foundation. In 2008, we established the Jean Kirkpatrick Academic Freedom Award. And since 2008, that vision has been brought forward by a very, very thorough process to select a worthy person from academia. And for these past years, the driving vision of executing this has been Jan Reardon, the Director for Community Programs. And Jan, will you please come forward and tell us who the winner this year is? Let's hear it for the Bradley Foundation. Well done, well done.
Good evening. During the days of Margaret Thatcher's leadership, the United States had its own Iron Lady, and that was Jean Jordan Kirkpatrick. Trained as an academic, Jean Kirkpatrick spent most of her life as a political science professor at Georgetown University. As a lifelong Democrat, she increasingly found that the foreign policy of the Democratic Party was at odds with her own principles. Their approach, as she famously said, was to blame America first. Does that sound familiar? Ambassador to the United Nations under Ronald Reagan, she remained a Democrat until she left public life in 1985. She was known for the Kirkpatrick Doctrine, which advocated U.S. support for anti-communist governments. But it was Mrs. Kirkpatrick's willingness to face down hostile crowds on college campuses which led to the creation of this award in her honor. In 1983, shouting down speakers was a shocking event, not a commonplace one as it is today. But what Stanley Kurtz calls the mother of all campus shout-downs happened in February 1983 to Jean Kirkpatrick at UC Berkeley. In an act of defiance against the hecklers who drowned her out, Mrs. Kirkpatrick finished her speech. She simply refused to be intimidated. The hecklers' justification that oppressors don't deserve free speech was ludicrous at the time, but it's an excuse that has become all too common today, almost 30 years later, and not just on college campuses. I'm from Wisconsin, I know. In many ways, the battle for academic freedom is the first battle of a free society. For without free minds, you cannot have any kind of freedom at all. And on today's campus, the scholar who pursues free inquiry is a pariah, a reactionary, an outcast, a conservative. Speaking the truth or even speaking an unpopular opinion requires the courage to face down colleagues who prefer to use scorn and derision rather than to debate, who think that calling you names is a refutation of your arguments, who shout you down without considering what you are saying. We are facing a movement in which the fundamental values of Western civilization, life, liberty, and property, are considered offensive, not because they don't matter, but because they do, because they represent a threat to those who hate the wealth, the success, and the independence of this society. And to the members of that movement, it is better to shout someone down than to engage them in an argument. We are all here tonight because a rational, free society still exists. And because if we value that freedom, we must celebrate the men and women whose courage to pursue knowledge is an essential element of living in and preserving a free society. Truth matters, scholarship matters, and courage is required for both. It is my very great pleasure to present tonight the Jean Jordan Kirkpatrick Prize for Academic Freedom to the University of Virginia's Professor James Caesar.
Well, thank you, Jan, for that very fine introduction, and I'm honored to receive this award, especially because it's named for Jean Kirkpatrick, who, as Jan mentioned, was for many years a political scientist at Georgetown, but she's remembered, of course, by all of us for her remarkable service during the Cold War as our ambassador to the United Nations, serving under Ronald Reagan. Now, this is the same position that was held during our current president's first term by Susan Rice, who delivered many speeches on university campuses, all without incident, no doubt because of her always candid and penetrating analyses of how, as in Benghazi, spontaneous popular demonstrations can magically turn in a moment to coordinated terrorist attacks. I can see now how serving at the UN might prepare someone to deal with the peculiar environment of our universities, and vice versa. There is, first of all, the uncanny resemblance between meetings of the General Assembly and faculty meetings. In what other venues can so many hold forth for so long expressing such tendentious views? Our nation's new and dear friend, Fidel Castro, holds the record for his 4-hour and 20-minute General Assembly address in 1960, a half hour in excess of the Oscar show last Sunday. The speeches of some deans and college presidents, though they may fall short by the clock, can, I assure you, seem that long. Then there's the similarity in views at the UN and on our college campuses about Israel, holding that little nation culpable for every woe that afflicts the Middle East. For years, the General Assembly has taken target practice at Israel, and many of the delegations in that august hall delight at listening to diatribes directed against it, like the one delivered a couple of years ago by the president of Iran, on schedule to become another friend, calling for Israel's elimination. On many college campuses, there's been a growing movement demanding that universities divest the securities of companies having ties to Israel. The American Studies Association, an academic organization of more than 5,000 strong, voted recently to impose a boycott on Israeli universities. Progressives on campus today seem to favor relaxing sanctions on Iran while embargoing relations with professors and institutes from Israel. Now, to their great credit, a number of college presidents deplored this action by the Blame America First Association, and they withdrew their university's membership from it. And it's certainly comforting that our president expressed a similar kind of resolve when he addressed the General Assembly back in 2010, declaring, "It should be clear to all that efforts to chip away at Israel's legitimacy will only be met by the unshakable opposition of the United States." Here was a steadfast promise. If you want your legitimacy, you can keep it. Now, the Prime Minister of Israel, as you know, is coming to Washington this week, and it's most unfortunate that no one from the administration will be in town to deliver this reassuring message to him. All of these major officials, from the Vice President down to the Secretary of State, have been called away for urgent meetings affecting the nation's security. I would imagine in places of great concern, like Liechtenstein, or the Marshall Islands, or Antigua. Since this award was given last March, the progressive forces bent on limiting academic freedom have very much been on the march. For them, it has been a banner year. One of their accomplishments has been to force the cancellation of speakers declared offensive to progressive views. They succeeded in getting Christine Lagarde, the head of IMF, to bow out of the commencement speech at Smith College. She had a 1% problem. And in getting Condoleezza Rice to withdraw from a commencement speech at Rutgers University. Didn't she serve in the Bush administration? A more spectacular version of the same thing has been to have college issue disinvitations, which is no doubt meant to be a public humiliation. The president of Scripps College solemnly excluded George Will, following a column he wrote treating the issue of sexual assault on college campuses that the progressive feminists deemed offensive. I might have suggested a replacement, a distinguished journalist from the magazine Rolling Stones. The president of Brandeis pulled an honorary degree from Miss Ayan Hirsi Ali, a champion of women's rights, originally from Somalia, where she had suffered severe discrimination, and who later fled to Netherlands under threat of death for speaking out too candidly against the repression of Muslim women. In a public statement retracting the offer of an honorary degree and speech to her, the president of Brandeis, a real profile in courage, was gracious enough to ask her, and I quote, to join us on campus in the future to engage in a dialogue about these important issues. The symbolism of this was exquisite. Just stop by. We won't let you in the front door, but you can always enter through the service door in the rear. All this would seem grounds for pessimism, but as conservatives, we've learned that it's far better to offer alternatives than to complain. This is such a great country that even the universities might be saved. In this vein, the William F. Buckley program at Yale University recently came up with an ingenious idea of holding an annual disinvitation dinner. The inaugural event will take place in New York on April 15th, and will have George Will as the keynote speaker. At the end of the day, who could not count the honor of an invitation to a disinvitation dinner as more than sufficient compensation for a disinvitation to an invitation dinner? Now, if there is no second dinner next year because no one has been disinvited, I would be very cautious before celebrating. The reason for such an outcome might well be that no one threatening the dominant consensus would even be invited in the first place. This result would mark a glorious victory for the progressive forces in the academy. And here, ladies and gentlemen, we arrive at the greatest threat that is posed by what is commonly known as political correctness. The ultimate objective of the ideology of political correctness is not the forced cancellation of conservative speakers. It is, if possible, to acquire such dominance and control over the mind of the academy that fewer and fewer would ever even conceive that other views should be heard or that they even exist. Political correctness begins with the suppression of speech, but it aims at the repression of thought. No one here this evening needs to be told that political correctness is rampant on our campuses today, but there is something more worrisome. It used to be thought that political correctness moved out from the college campuses to exercise a modest influence on society and on the world of politics. But today, the movement of political correctness and its thought is traveling in both directions. The manipulation of language, the distortion of words, these are the tactics and tricks of political correctness. These are pathologies that are now regularly practiced at the highest level of government, at the Justice Department and at the White House. And from there, they are introduced onto the campuses. Reminding ourselves about the threats to academic freedom is the purpose of the Jeane Kirkpatrick Award. But it is possible to dwell so much on these threats that we forget to ask, what is academic freedom for? What end or goal or purpose is supposed to be served by it? What, as the ancient Greeks thinkers might have asked, what is its telos? Now, I know that universities have many functions to perform in our modern society, including transmission of important skills, advancement of research, and the preparation of young minds for gainful and productive employment. But higher education has another end, the civilizing mission. It is to afford at least some of our youth the opportunity, and a precious opportunity it is, to question the prejudices and conventions of their surroundings and to begin to think for themselves. So the ultimate goal of academic freedom is the free human being. The shame of our universities today, and it is the shame really of its teachers and administrators, is that they either ignore or have forgotten this higher purpose, exchanging it for the cheap alternative of using the university as a playground to promote a political ideology. Now, some no doubt will say that the goal of striving to produce free human beings is too much to aspire to. Perhaps it is. But if we can't achieve the highest, we should at least work to ban the lowest, which is promoting academic enslavement. Isn't it time to remind our teachers and administrators, in the name of our students, let my people go? Give you this now, or should I take it?
No, you take it.
Okay,
Yours.
I'll take it. Okay, get rid of all this junk.
I'll take all this.
To introduce our keynote speaker this evening, please welcome Matt Schlapp, an ACU board member, John Eddy.
I wanted to just say a couple of things about one of our newest board members, John Eddy. You can see John Eddy's name graces the stage here and around the front. But there's a name also that graces that stage, and that's Tracy Eddy, and we're really sorry that Tracy is not able to be with us tonight. I worked with Tracy in the White House, and she's a wonderful person, and we're very proud to have John on our board. I just wanted you all to know that John has stepped forward to help the conservative cause in so many ways. He was a founding chairman of this great group called American Majority, which helped lead our training, our activism boot camp on the Wednesday before CPAC, and we are so appreciative of all the things John has done to help ACU. And he is going to introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you for everything, John.
Well, one thing I did notice when Matt was speaking today was to keep it short and you will do well. So that's what I'm going to do tonight. It is my pleasure to introduce Governor Mike Pence, our keynote speaker. As governor, he has balanced the budget. He has added 100,000 new private sector jobs, and he's taken unemployment from 8% down to 5.8% in the great state of Indiana. I wish we had more of him here in Washington, D.C., that's for sure. So it is my pleasure to introduce the 50th governor of the state of Indiana, Governor Mike Pence.
Thank you, John. Thank you for that warm introduction. Good evening to you all. It's an honor to be with you among such a large group of so many Americans, men and women who represent the bulwark of the leadership of the conservative movement in the United States of America. I appreciate that kind introduction, but the introduction I prefer is a little bit shorter. I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican, in that order. You know, there's an old saying, when you see a box turtle on a fence post, you know one thing for sure: he didn't get there on his own. That's certainly true of my life. And other than my faith, my family, my beloved wife who's with me here tonight, and my fellow Hoosiers, I rise tonight first and foremost to pay a debt of gratitude to all of you. I owe so much to CPAC, to this movement, to the namesake of this dinner, for the inspiration and opportunities I have been given. It is good to be back at CPAC, the premier conservative gathering in the United States of America. We gather in 2015 in a challenging time in the life of this nation. An administration paralyzed by ideology and incompetence has weakened America's place in the world and stifled our nation's economy. While the challenges we face are daunting, the choices we must make to meet them are not. 50 years ago, Ronald Reagan helped to birth our movement with his iconic Time for Choosing speech. Today, I believe we are come to another time for choosing. You either choose to view America as a shining city on the hill that inspires the best in all mankind, or you don't. You either want America to stand by her friends and stand up to her enemies, or you don't. You either are for limiting the power of the federal government, or you're not. And you're either for protecting the unborn and the religious liberty of every American, or you aren't. Well, I say tonight, after winning both houses of Congress, more state houses than ever before, and electing 31 Republican governors in states like Maryland and Massachusetts and Illinois, The American people have made their choice, and we are on the verge of a great American comeback for our ideals. I believe that because I believe in this movement. My grandfather immigrated to this country from Ireland. My dad built a gas station business in a small town in southern Indiana. While I actually started in politics as a Democrat, when I heard the voice of the 40th President of the United States, it all changed for me. I lived the dream of becoming a congressman from that small town, and now I serve as governor of the great state of Indiana. You know, I served 12 years in the Congress, and I love to say, if I only had 12 years left to live, I'd want to live it as a member of Congress, because that was the longest 12 years of my life. The truth is, we haven't had a government as good as our people in Washington, D.C. for some time. But it's worse today than ever before. At home, the errors of this administration are almost too numerous to recount. Whether it's the government takeover of health care or now the internet, the president's unconstitutional executive amnesty, or the war on coal, this administration's policies are sapping our national vitality and threatening our prosperity. Now, most Americans understand you cannot improve health care by ordering every American to buy health insurance, whether they want it or need it or not. You cannot expect the internet to thrive beneath unwarranted and unjustifiable regulation. You cannot change the laws of this land by executive fiat. And you cannot build an energy policy by raising the cost of electricity on working Americans. It should almost go without saying, Obamacare must be repealed, the FCC's rule must be reversed, the President's executive action rescinded, and the EPA's war on American energy must end. But tonight, allow me to offer some advice to the rising generation of leaders who are gathered here at CPAC and maybe looking on from across the country, of how we might confront the challenges we face with renewed focus at home and abroad. First, let me submit that 2016 could actually be the first foreign policy national election since 1980. And sadly, this administration has reduced our Army to its smallest size since 1940. The Navy has fewer ships than at any time since 1916. And our Air Force has its smallest tactical fighter force in history. Now, history teaches that you cannot reduce our military strength without provoking our enemies. Weakness arouses evil. As we speak, ISIS is setting up franchises across the Middle East and is on the offensive across the Arab world. Now, the President says that jobs are the answer to violent jihad. Well, Mr. President, Jihadi John doesn't want a job. He wants to see paradise, and I think we should help him get there as quickly as possible. And with the growing threat of homegrown terror, it's important to remember that our first line of defense is the right of self-defense. Now more than ever, the right to keep and bear arms must not be infringed on the American people. But violent jihad is not our only threat. In Asia, China is massively expanding its military. Just last month, the Pentagon admitted that China's satellite and ballistic missile technologies are rapidly approaching parity with our own. And as we gather here tonight, a new iron curtain is descending down the spine of Europe as modern Russia seeks to redraw the map of Europe by force. Unlike the former Soviet Union that respected the strength of the West, Putin's Russia ignores talk of sanctions, claims land, and supports rebels in Ukraine with impunity. And if we didn't know enough about the threat we face from Iran, the Heritage Foundation's annual index of military strength, released just this week, lists Iran as, quote, by far the most significant security challenge facing the United States and its allies and its interests in the Middle East. Now, in a few days, the leader of our most cherished ally will come to Washington, D.C. to warn Congress and the American people of the gathering storm he believes will strike his country and threaten ours if we allow the world's most dangerous regime to obtain the world's most dangerous weapons. Traveling to Israel last December, I met with Prime Minister Netanyahu in his private quarters on the very day that the Palestinian Authority was trying to force a settlement on Israel through the United Nations that would have compromised Israel's security. I saw firsthand the resolve and determination of this courageous leader, who stands too often alone in times of great peril across the Middle East. Speaker Boehner was right to invite Prime Minister Netanyahu to address our Congress and our nation at such a time as this. Israel's cause is our cause. Israel's enemies are our enemies. If the world knows nothing else, let it know this: America stands with Israel. The truth is, you cannot command the respect of the world when you spend years apologizing to our enemies and abandoning our friends. Lecturing the American people about the Crusades while refusing to call Islamic extremism by name is an abdication of leadership. As President Reagan taught us, peace comes through strength. Providing for the common defense of the United States is the chief responsibility of our national government. With everything happening in the world, I believe, my fellow conservatives, I believe it is imperative that conservatives again embrace America's role as leader of the free world and the arsenal of democracy. I believe the time has come to dramatically increase defense spending to confront the knowable and unknowable threats of this still new century. Without rebuilding our military, no strategy or innovation, no matter how brilliant, will be sufficient to protect the American people and the sovereignty of the United States. Among other measures, we could revive the future combat systems of the Army and the Marine Corps, resume production of the best and most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, the F-22, and we could rebuild our Navy. A safer and more secure America is a stronger and more prosperous America. Of course, our strength begins at home, in our families, our communities, in our businesses, and in our states. So second, let me suggest that our movement also put the promise of federalism and state-based reform back at the center of the conservative agenda in the 21st century. As President Reagan said, it's important to be reminded, and I quote, that the federal government did not create the states created the federal government. Our states are not territorial outposts of the federal government. They are a wellspring of our vitality and reform. I should know. I come from a state that works. In Indiana, we've balanced budgets and have a AAA bond rating. That's a lot better than Washington, D.C. We passed the largest state tax cut in Indiana history. We have the largest educational voucher program in America. I'm proud to say Indiana was the first state to withdraw from Common Core. And amidst the shifting sands of contemporary culture and law, we have stood without apology for the sanctity of life, the importance of marriage, and the freedom of religion. And it's working. In our first 2 years in office, unemployment has dropped from over 8% to 5.8%. We've seen 100,000 new private sector jobs created, and last year we led the nation in manufacturing jobs created. Graduation rates are up, test scores are up, and life is winning in Indiana. Abortion is in decline in the great state of Indiana for the 5th straight year in a row. Now, I didn't come here to brag on Indiana. Well, I didn't just come here to brag about Indiana. I came really to encourage you. Encourage each of you here today with the progress that's being made in Indiana and in other Republican-led states, and to urge you as leaders and activists in this movement to take encouragement from the successful results conservative policies are achieving in states across this country. After 12 years in Congress and 2 years as governor, I am more convinced that the cure for what ails this country will come more from our nation's state capitals than it ever will from our nation's capital. So let's put state-based innovation and reform back at the center of our national agenda. Let's look to the example of Republican-led states that are balancing budgets and crafting solutions to the most intractable problems facing our nation. And that includes getting runaway federal spending under control. You know, when it comes to most public assistance programs, states are simply better equipped to innovate and manage anti-poverty programs in a fiscally responsible way. Because states can't print money. During my years in Congress, I honestly never recall anyone focusing on revenue forecasts when we passed a spending bill. But in Indiana, where we have balanced budgets, this year's budget will only be completed when we get the final revenue forecast to make sure that the income meets the outgo. And states are better equipped to innovate and reform those antiquated programs. In Indiana, we ended traditional Medicaid for all able-bodied adults and replaced it with consumer-driven health care and health savings accounts. We've expanded access to health care not through government mandates and taxes, but through market-based reforms grounded in personal responsibility and self-reliance. On education, because we believe that all honest work is honorable, today Indiana is crafting plans to be the first state in America to make career and vocational education a priority in every high school in our state again. So let's empower the states with renewed flexibility to develop positive, substantive alternatives. And let's give each other room as a movement to try new ideas and innovate without reflexively rejecting policies that break new ground. In fact, let's wean ourselves off the Washington-centered notion that every problem must find its answer in our nation's capital. Now, some say the next nominee of our party should be a governor, and I'm certainly sympathetic to that view. But all kidding aside, what I can tell you that I'm looking for is not somebody that says, send me to Washington, D.C., and I'll run our nation's capital the way I ran our state capital. For those of us who've served in this city, you know, Washington, D.C. is not a state, literally or figuratively. I'm listening for someone who says, send me to Washington, D.C., and I'll make it more possible for the next person running my state to run it with more freedom and more flexibility. That's the constitutional way. So when we win back the White House and re-elect Republican Congress, let's make it our aim to permanently reduce the size and scope of the federal government by restoring to the states the freedom, flexibility, and resources that is theirs under the Constitution of the United States of America. And finally, as we strive to be the party of solutions at home and abroad, let's be relentlessly positive. You know, I've said for years I'm a conservative, but I'm not in a bad mood about it. We need to be cheerful partisans, happy warriors. Lord knows we need a little optimism these days. I was reminded of that not long ago. I was at the Indiana State Fair, and a man walked up to me, a great conservative older gentleman with sad eyes and a weary look about him. He approached me to say that he supported everything I stood for, and then he asked with a trembling lip, he said, "Governor, do you think the country's going to make it?" He had all the telltale signs of excessive cable television viewing. I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, "Of course we're going to make it. We're Americans. We always make it. We always find a way." But you know, that man and millions like him are worried, understandably, about our country and our future because of the failings of our national government. Our national government does have all kinds of problems and flaws and weakness. But let's remember, America is not the American government. Let's stop confusing the American government with the American people. Ronald Reagan said it best: we are a people with a government, not the other way around. You know, I learned that lesson a long time ago, back when Indianapolis was hosting all the living recipients of the Medal of Honor. We were dedicating our memorial to all those great men throughout history. I was a talk radio show host at the time, and I had the privilege of interviewing those heroes, one of whom was a man named Jack Lucas. Jack was born in 1928 in North Carolina. He enlisted in the Marine Corps in August of 1942 at the age of 14. PFC Lucas was so determined to join combat that he stowed away on the USS Duel to join the 5th Marine Division as they went into the South Pacific. Jack turned 17 at sea just a few days before landing at Iwo Jima. On the day following the landing, Private Lucas was crawling through a ravine with 3 men in his rifle team when 2 enemy hand grenades landed nearby. The teenager used his own body to cover both hand grenades and saved his fellow Marines despite suffering horrible injuries. And in October of 1945, PFC Jack Lucas was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Harry Truman. So I had him on my radio show, and during the interview, we talked about his experiences. We exchanged pleasantries. He spoke with remarkable humility about his extraordinary courage. And then I asked him a question. I said, Jack, you're part of the greatest generation. So you're probably really worried about this country when you see young people these days. Well, in that moment, Jack's countenance changed. And that old soldier looked at me and said, son, you obviously don't have the first idea what you're talking about. I laughed nervously. I mean, this was live radio. And I said, well, why don't you enlighten me? And he did. Jack said, let me tell you something. He said, growing up back in the 1930s, he said, we didn't have any more sense than kids do these days. He said, we wasted just as much time, we partied just as much, but when the time came, we stepped up because we're Americans. And kids these days will do just the same thing. Well, as we say, you know, I'd been told. I didn't know how right Jack was until a few years later, on a sunny morning in September of 2001. That day I found myself in my first term as a member of Congress on Capitol Hill. Sirens blaring in every direction, columns of mud-brown smoke billowing from the Pentagon. And the next day, there were lines outside every recruiting station in every city and town across this nation. And Jack was right. In the years that followed, in my trips downrange to visit our soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq, I saw the sacrifices of the new greatest generation, who, just like Jack said, stepped up and did what needed to be done. So I say with conviction tonight, the American people today, despite all the failings of our national government, the American people today are every bit as strong and patriotic and generous and selfless and resilient and freedom-loving as they have ever been throughout the great history of this great nation. And our nation deserves leaders of our party and this movement who believe in the American people with an unshakable faith. And faith is my final point, because we are not in this alone. The Bible says where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's liberty. When we hold the banner of liberty high, when we take up the cause of freedom at home and abroad, I believe with all of my heart We make his cause on this earth our very own, and we do not fight alone. So, my fellow conservatives, let's be confident, and let's have faith. Faith in America's unique responsibility in the world and in the founder's vision of limited and constitutional government. Faith in the boundless capacity of the American people, especially in our states, to craft solutions to the complex problems that are facing us. And faith in him who set this miracle of democracy on these wilderness shores, that he will fulfill his promise for this last best hope of earth. We have come to another time for choosing, and I believe with all my heart, with your help and with God's help, once again, America will choose freedom. Thank you, and God bless you.